So one thing you can take note of when it comes to taking care of your worms, knowing that they're fed and happy and well, to notice what other kinds of forms of life are in that bin. So we're going to talk about some of the key forms of life to look out for and how you can respond to those, what they're telling you about the worm farm, and what sort of balances and checks you need to put in place to make sure that your worms are happy, as well as whatever it is that's moved into your worm farm too. First thing we'll talk about is mold. So as we mentioned, it's really important to feed your worms fresh food and food that doesn't go moldy very quickly. But inevitably, you'll probably get some mold in your worm farm at some point. So managing mold, if it's gotten really developed and you can clearly see a lot of fuzzy black, grey or white molds on the top of the surface of your worm farm, then you probably want to look at actually just taking out those materials completely. Acidity is a really common problem in worm farms, especially here in Dunedin, where it's a little bit cool and a little bit damp a lot of the time. So acidity, you might notice a vinegary smell in your worm farm. So one of the first common signs which are indicators of acidity in your worm farm is white mites, red spider mites, and other little tiny mites crawling around in your worm farm. Often when you open the lid for the first time, you'll see a wave of these flies come out. They are fruit flies or vinegar flies, and they are a really common sign that you've got a high acidity in your worm farm. One of the other things that is a marker of acidity is having little potworms or white worms. These are a very small little worm, which is very common to find in wet and acidic worm farms. When we are trying to reduce acidity, we can also reduce water. So we might add some really dry wood shavings or sawdust or very dry leaves. All of these materials added into your worm farm will help to balance out moisture and bring in a little bit more oxygen, which can help to balance out that acidity rate. You might need another step to ensure that you can regulate that acidity. So one of the very direct ways you can do this is to add very alkaline materials into the bin. Something with a high pH to balance out the low pH. So what you can do there is add something like garden lime or dolomite or clay, or maybe even some crushed up eggshells. If you've got a lot of potworms or white worms in there, you could add a little lid full of milk or beer, which is really sweet and sugary, and they'll all get drawn in there. Take that out and you'll probably remove most of those worms as well.